Hey, what's up, everybody? I wanted to have just a very quick discussion about some of the news that's been going around over the past week or so, mostly in relation to the Black Friday sales, some of the discounts we've seen, what seems to be a very poor showing from Xbox, a very good showing for this new thing called the NEX Playground. I say new, but it's been out for a couple of years. I'm gonna have Mario 3D Land playing in the background footage because I'm working on a retrospective on that game right now, but I'll periodically throw some slides up on the screen for any relevant information. So first things first, just to kind of give people a step-by-step of what we've seen over the course of the past few weeks. Obviously, over the past few months, especially leading up to this November and Black Friday, we know that the Switch 2 is not really doing all that great in Europe. Right now, Japan and USA were carrying most of the sale-through numbers. In the case of the US, while it's been acceptable for a console in its early 6 months, the common belief has been that this thing is going to have a killer Christmas season. More so in December because that's usually better for Nintendo, but you'd expect a fairly good showing for November. Now, I'm actually going to table some of the discussion about the November numbers for the Switch 2 in the United States until we get the Circana data in about a week from now. But as we've seen through quite a few headlines, Sony had a phenomenal Black Friday. I say Black Friday, but really I mean that entire week. This is all shared by information that we've gotten from Circana, which is from Matt Piscatella, and he usually shares that information over on his Blue Sky. And Matt Piscatella is somebody that clearly loves his job and seems to really enjoy sharing data to get people having a conversation. In the week leading up to Black Friday, he tweeted that the ranking of sales for that particular week, which ended on the 22nd, I think, going strictly based off of individual SKUs. And for those of you that don't know, individual SKUs just implies that it's like a single item. So like the Mario Kart World Bundle has its own SKU, the regular Switch 2 has its own SKU, the Pokemon Bundle has its own SKU, every game has their own SKU. And likewise in the case of Sony, you have like the physical console has its own SKU. If there's a bundle with Fortnite, that's its own SKU. If there's one with Ghost of Yotai, that's its own SKU. You get the idea. But based off of the information that he shared, the single best-selling SKU for the week leading up to Black Friday was the Mario Kart World Bundle. And in second place just behind it was the NEX Playground, which has been making the rounds over the past few weeks. I'll talk about that in a bit. And in third place was one SKU of the PS5. I believe it was the digital version that was on sale for $400. So naturally, when Matt shared that information, everybody's like, oh, the Switch 2 is having the best November ever. And it's like, Nintendo's in first. The NEX Playground is even beating Sony, and Sony's in third place, and they can't even get second place. But obviously for people that are able to read between the lines, you knew this was not the case. It was just like a random bit of data that he was sharing to stir up some information discussion, I guess. I don't think there was any malice behind him sharing it. I don't even think he was trying to mislead people. But the average person is going to read that and interpret it a specific way. The first and probably most important thing to note is that there are only really 2 SKUs for the Switch 2 that were relevant in November. 3 if you count the Pokemon Bundle, but the Pokemon Bundle for the most part has been sold out. Not because it sold very well in October, it sold enough in October, but there was actually not that much stock for the Pokemon Bundle in general. The Mario Kart World Bundle is the one that's been being pushed by Nintendo the most. Now personally, I'm of the opinion that most of the Mario Kart World Bundles that are still at retailers are ones that were ordered back in July, and due to the excess stock that most of these people got, they decided to not order that many Pokemon bundles when that came out, and they're still burning through those Mario Kart World bundles now, but that's not the discussion of this video. What we know for sure though is that the Mario Kart World Bundle is the one that's getting the most attention, and it's the one that's selling the most. In the case of the PlayStation 5, there are multiple SKUs. Like I think there are at least 3 or 4 of them that are selling fairly equally across the board. A combination of digital ones, physical ones, the Pro model, some of them come with bundles, some of them come without bundles. So even when Matt Piscatella shared this ranking for the individual SKUs, it was kind of obvious to me, and hopefully to some others, that it was just like a neat bit of trivia, not really any indication that the Switch 2 is outperforming the PS5 and the NEX Playground is outperforming the PS5. Now, obviously, his tweet gave Nintendo fans something enjoyable to rally behind for a week or so. And normally we don't get this information in December, so by the time he tweeted this, there had already been Black Friday completed, we've gotten to Cyber Monday, and the Switch 2 has had its $50 discount, which prompted a lot of Nintendo fans to just be like, well, this thing is selling so well, they decided to discount it, because that makes sense. Not, you know, the Switch 1, which was doing phenomenal for 7 years and never got a single discount, but the Switch 2, that's the one they're going to start discounting because of how good it's selling. So all of this kind of stirred up quite a bit of discussion in like the Nintendo circles. Now, not too long after that, we start getting information about how good actual Black Friday week was. And of course, a lot of you guys have already heard about this by now, but Sony absolutely killed it during Black Friday. The first bit of information was about Europe, where Nintendo has already been losing to Sony quite a bit. So most people just like shrugged it off as like, oh, you know, it's Sony and they're doing aggressive discounts. And it's Europe, which was already like a tough battleground for Nintendo. But the PS5 outsold the Switch 2 by quite a bit of a margin. I think it was like a 3-to-1 margin, something like that. Now, I should point out, and this applies to Europe as well as the United States, while the PlayStation 5 was discounted during Black Friday, the deals for the average person were just PS5 prices. Most people that are buying a PlayStation 5 for Black Friday do not realize that 2 months ago the prices went up. Right now, at the stores, the price of the PS5 is effectively exactly what it was through most of the summer. Sony, Xbox, every company, aside from Nintendo, in general, always offers discounts. Their consoles are always on sale. And looking at the Black Friday prices right now for the cheapest model of the PS5, it's actually more expensive than the previous year's Black Friday. So while yes, Sony offered good Black Friday deals, they didn't offer anything special in comparison to the previous years. Like if you consider back in 2017 when the Switch 1 came out and the PlayStation 4 had a phenomenal Black Friday, the PlayStation 4 was cheaper than the original Switch. They were selling it for like $200 on that year. Right now, Sony had a very good Black Friday with their consoles being effectively the same price that they were 5 years ago, the same price that they were like 6 months ago, with like the slightest bit of discounts. Now, after we got word that the Black Friday week in Europe was phenomenal for Sony, Matt Piscatello shared data for us about what happened in Black Friday here in the United States, and of course, as many of you would know by now, the PlayStation 5 did amazing. It completely outsold Nintendo Switch 2, effectively doubling the amount of units sold for this PlayStation 5 versus the Switch 2. And again, to reiterate, the PlayStation 5 was not really cheaper than the Switch 2. You're talking a price difference of the base model PS5 being 10% different. And while that $400 PS5 was the best selling of all the PS5 units, all of them together sold very well, including the Pro model, which comes in at $650. So the prices for the Nintendo Switch 2 and for the PlayStation 5 during this Black Friday season were basically comparable. And I would argue that on average, the PlayStation 5 is probably more expensive because those bundles and those disc units and the Pro models are bringing up the average of the PlayStation 5 unit price that was sold. And I'm stressing this because there are many people who are trying to pretend that the reason the PlayStation 5 completely outsold the Nintendo Switch 2 is because of like these phenomenal Black Friday deals that made it a deal that was too good to pass up. No, that couldn't be further than the truth. There was nothing that was too good to pass up about the PS5 prices. They were more or less in line with prices that we've seen as early as this most recent August when they had similar deals. And they were not even remotely close to the lowest prices we have seen for the PS5 in the past 12 to 24 months. But a very big reason why the PS5 sold as well as it did is because it's one of the best value propositions currently on the market. And now let me make this very clear. As a Nintendo fan my entire life, there's nothing worse for me to do right now than to glaze Sony and praise them for having a successful Black Friday. Just to clarify, I have not owned a PlayStation console since the PS2, and I think I've only played the PS5 once. So this is not me trying to incite a console war, as like some undercover Sony fan. If anything, I am mad that I have to do this. But the reality is right now, if you're looking at the gaming market, and clearly the masses are agreeing with it, at least when you consider November, the best current value proposition in gaming right now is the PlayStation 5. This is what the casual market is buying up during the holidays. This is without any major bump because of a new game that came out. This is without any major bump because the console just came out, like with the Switch 2, for example. This is a console 5 years in its lifetime that has had a rocky start according to most metrics, especially when you consider the exclusives that are not there. And yet still, the holiday shoppers are viewing it as the best bang for their buck. Now, we know that during that week of Black Friday, the PS5 outsold the Switch 2 at a ratio of 2-to-1. What we don't know is how much it outsold it over the whole month of November. Again, we'll find that out next week. I'm guessing it's going to be like 1.5 to 1.75 times what the Switch 2 sold. Now, in general, Sony has always won November and Nintendo wins December. And the reason this happens is because the people that are buying the PlayStation console in November are seeing the discounts in Black Friday. So they'll come out and they'll buy a PlayStation console because it won't have that deal in December. And then when December comes around, Nintendo does very well because when people go to the store in December, they can spend $200 on a Switch Lite, $300 on a regular Switch, or $350 on a Switch OLED. So you have to imagine families that are going to shop in December every year prior to this year, they can basically buy 2 or 3 Switch Lites for all of their kids, their nieces and nephews, or their grandchildren for almost the price of a single PS5. Especially because the Black Friday deals for the PS5 are normally done by the time we get to December. This has historically made Nintendo's December very successful. But this year there are obviously some new variables to discuss. Easily the biggest talking point is that the PlayStation 5 is going to remain with the same discounts that it currently has all the way through to Christmas. So in the past, by the time they hit Cyber Monday and the prices end up going back up after those deals are done, and this year, it's going to stay at a consistent price that we saw on Black Friday. Now, this doesn't mean that I think the PS5 is going to have as successful weeks as they did on Black Friday through the entirety of December, but it means that it will be probably doing better than most years. And a big reason for that, in addition to the fact that they're continuing with the same prices that they had during Black Friday, which, again, to reiterate, are not that much cheaper than what we've normally seen PS5s go for. In addition to that, the Nintendo console this time around is $450 minimum. So now when families are going Christmas shopping, it's no longer a $400 or $500 console versus a $200 to $350 console. The Nintendo console costs just as much as the PlayStation 5. This is also going to make Nintendo's December not nearly as successful as it's been in the past. Because like I've been saying over and over again since April, the primary reason for Nintendo's success amongst the casuals outside of us gamers that watch YouTube videos and pay attention to this stuff, but the large numbers that Nintendo always pulls in is primarily because of its approachable introductory price. And we saw this for a bit in the first week of December, where all of the retailers decided to go behind Nintendo's back and drop their prices on their own in the United States, which is something that is unheard of for a Nintendo console, specifically a Switch console. They gave it a 10% discount, which we'll have to see if that's going to make that big of a difference in December or not. I personally don't think it's going to change things all that much. It'll definitely increase the value proposition of the Switch 2 bundle, but at the end of the day, when the masses go to the store, they're still going to be seeing PlayStation 5 for $400 to $650 and Nintendo Switch starting at $450. Because that 10% discount only applies to the Mario Kart World bundle, which effectively puts it at the same price as the base model. So either way, the Switch 2 is costing $450. It's not the family-friendly budget deal that we've seen. Now, what Nintendo could have done in this holiday season, but obviously they don't want to do this because it would be counterintuitive to the long-term plans, they could have aggressively discounted the Nintendo Switch 1. The profit margins on the original Switch are absurdly high. This is old technology. Like the margin on the Switch 2 are also absurdly high. Obviously, if these retailers are able to willy-nilly discount it $50, they're getting it for much cheaper than that. But for the Switch 1, we know that the margins are much higher than they are for the Switch 2, especially now this late into its lifespan. So Nintendo could have been like, hey, Switch Lite's $150. That's our Black Friday deal. And it comes with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They could have done a Pokemon Legends ZA OLED for $250, and they easily could have sold the Switch 1 in the same way that the Xbox was pushing the Series S, especially early on in that generation. Obviously, now it's a whole different discussion because Microsoft is completely changing the way that they're treating the console gaming discussion. But Black Friday 2022, 2023, the Series S was going for like $250, and the Series X was the full price. They dropped it down, I think, to $350 at one point. But obviously, the idea is that they have a cheaper model for people that are looking for the budget gaming console, and they have the more expensive one. The Switch 1 could easily have been Nintendo's Series S going into the holiday season. But at least for right now, Nintendo doesn't want to hurt the appeal of the Switch 2 by making good deals for the Switch 1, which is something they would have loved to have done in the past. They would sell fairly discounted 3DSs for a cheaper price after the Switch came out. But the difference is, in the past, the 3DS was not competing with the Switch. When someone would go to the store, the 3DS library and the Switch library were completely separate, so Nintendo was okay with that discount. Now what'll happen is if you make the Switch 1 too appealing, people are gonna go there and be like, hang on a second, like the biggest appeal of the Switch 2 is playing Switch 1 games, at least for right now. Even with the newer games, like Pokemon Legends and Metroid Prime, those are cross-gen games. So at least this year, they can't go aggressive on the Switch 1, because it would completely neuter their sales for the Switch 2. I think this will change in a year from now, by the way, when there are more exclusives for the Switch 2, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. So now what we see happening is that people are going to be going to the stores, they're looking for a console to buy for Christmas. Their choices are basically $450 plus consoles, or I guess technically $400 starting with the PlayStation 5 digital. And there's no real budget option because even the prices of the Switch 1 have gone up. And even if the Switch 1 prices hadn't gone up, this is a console that's been out for quite a while. Many families are not looking to buy the same thing for their kids that they bought last year. So there's currently a void that's not being filled for families that are looking for budget gifts. Now, I say the term budget fairly loosely, right? $200+ on a Christmas gift might be a lot depending on who you're buying it for, but if you consider it from the angle of somebody that's buying something for their kids or grandchildren or whatnot. The point is that that low price point is not really there anymore because Nintendo completely left a gap. And this could not have worked out better for the new device on the block, the NEX Playground, or as I like to call it, the Nextbox. So if you're wondering why this thing is doing so well, it's mostly because it's a budget game console that's available for the holidays. It's taking a lot of those sales that would have originally gone to a Nintendo Switch console. For a Nintendo console in general, it's low priced and it's innovative. And most importantly, it's being marketed to the right people. A lot of people are rightfully going to be comparing this to the Kinect, but the price of entry for the Kinect was absurdly high because you had to buy an Xbox console and then get the Kinect on top of it. And let's be real, similar to something like the PlayStation Move that came out around the time after the Wii, the crowd for the Kinect is probably not the Xbox crowd. It's more likely to be that casual Nintendo crowd, the same type of people that made the Wii a cultural phenomenon. So while many people are rightfully going to be comparing this to the Kinect, I would think that it has a lot more similarities with the Wii and the way that kind of took things by storm. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean I think this is going to sell as well as the Wii did, but it's also not made by Nintendo. Make something very clear. If this thing was called the Nintendo Playground and it came to the market at $250, I think it easily does Wii numbers. But for something that's not Nintendo related, is coming out of nowhere, it's having a very impressive showing this holiday season. Last I checked on Amazon, it's selling just as well as that Mario Kart World bundle is over the past 30 days. That's over 100,000 units off of Amazon alone. And to put things into perspective, the Switch 2, very high in demand because it's a console that just launched, has been averaging just over 300,000 units sold in the past few months. So for something to basically come out of nowhere and be able to sell 100,000 off of a single retailer in Amazon, this is not even counting like Walmart sales and Target sales and whatnot. But this is definitely something incredible, and it's something that is worth keeping an eye on. It might take the world by storm. Now, as far as the device itself goes, I want to do a deeper video on it, but from my understanding, it's like a little tiny cube. It fits into like a kid's hand. It's really small. There's a camera on the front of it. You get like all these mini games where you wave your hands in the air. I believe it's a digital only thing. I think it comes with like 5 or 6 free games like Fruit Ninja. And the bigger packages are all, obviously, because it's 2025, a subscription model. Now, I'm by no means endorsing this as like the next gen best console that somebody should buy because of the innovation behind it. And there are some things about it that would make me not buy it. But you have to think about the value proposition for this for people that are going out to buy a Christmas gift for their kids. It starts at $250, and I believe during Black Friday week it was at $200, and I think you could still get it for $200 right now from some retailers, although they are on back order, you might not get it by Christmas. And you don't have to buy any controllers, no accessories, nothing. You just plug it into your TV and it just works. And it gives parents that guilt-free feeling where it's like, this is screen time for your kids, but it's not actually screen time. They're still jumping up and down and waving their arms around. It's brilliant. And what makes it even more brilliant is that none of us knew about this thing. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a bit, but like I've seen this thing at the top of every single retailer while I've been tracking Switch 2 numbers. Anytime I've searched on Target for like video game consoles or Walmart and I like look at the sales numbers that are on there, this cube has always been on the top of those searches. They were sponsoring it for a few months. And I scrolled past it every single time, never once clicking on it. I just thought it was like some like weird peripheral that Target was selling. I had no idea what this thing was. I didn't even realize people were buying it. And you'd think a game console, and I'm a gaming YouTuber, somebody that is very enthusiastic about this stuff, and my audience is likewise, and all of the different forums I'm involved in likewise. So many people had no idea this thing even existed until Matt Piscatella tweeted about it ranking just below the Switch and above the PS5 a week and a half ago. That seems odd, right? The internet has unlimited information. Ads are always targeted, right? This is a gaming console. You'd think that gamers would know about it. But that's when I realized that they were not advertising this towards gamers. They knew that we would shrug it off. We'd be like, it's just a Kinect clone. No, they were smart about it. This thing has been being advertised to moms. Now, this is obviously anecdotal, but after the Matt Piscatella tweet, I casually was like talking about it to my wife. I was like, yeah, apparently there's like this game console that nobody knew about that sold very well. And she was like, oh, I see that all the time on Instagram. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, all of the influencers are talking about it. For the past few months, all of the moms have been asking each other if they should buy it for their kids. And listen, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I asked almost every single group chat that I'm in if their wives knew what it was, because none of the guys did. And we're a very stereotypical group. All of us are gamers. We all grew up gamers, and all of our wives either don't game or they game very little. And they all pretty much had the exact same experience that I did. They went to their wife and they're like, have you heard of this thing? And all of them were like, yeah, everybody all over Instagram and TikTok is talking about it. That's why all of us are scratching our head right now, because we're all gamers who are looking at like Nintendo and Xbox and PlayStation. Meanwhile, these dudes made a budget video game console and called it a toy and advertised it to moms to buy for their kids. It's actually genius. And it's selling enough, at least in this holiday season, to make a difference in the discussion around gaming. This is an innovative budget console that would normally make Nintendo fans jump up and cheer, almost literally in the case of this thing because of the games that are there and the type of gaming that it's done. And so I'm of the opinion that any sale that would have normally gone towards Nintendo for having, like a $200 deal on a Switch Lite, for example, or if a retailer dropped it down to like $180 and included a game, those numbers that normally would have been picked up by that are now being picked up by this thing. And it's not an irrelevant number. And likewise, a big reason why Sony is doing as well as it does is because Xbox is not being as aggressive with their console as well. So what seems to be happening, at least the way I interpret it, going into this holiday season from Black Friday and through the end of December, I think Sony, regardless of all external factors, just based off of the price of the PlayStation 5 versus the Switch 2, was always going to be doing better than the Switch 2. But I think the gap is much larger because Sony is picking up numbers from Xbox, since they've all but checked out of the whole console rivalry, and Nintendo is losing numbers because their console is not only more expensive, but there is an alternative now that's much cheaper, the family-friendly alternative. This doesn't necessarily mean that if this NEX Playground didn't exist, that those families might have just bought a Nintendo Switch 2. Obviously some families are going to buy a Switch 2 and they're going to get the NEX Playground. It's not that uncommon. But I think more realistically, families that were coming into the store and were looking for a budget option, I think they would have just not spent their money on a game console. They might have decided to grab some kind of alternative, like a pair of nice headphones or a controller for the kid's console, some games, tablets. But those alternate sales would not have shown up in the discussion. The discussion for the game consoles would have been that the PlayStation 5 is outselling the Switch 2 2-1, and then everything else is much lower. Instead, what we're seeing is that for every 6-ish PlayStation 5s that are sold, 3 Nintendo Switch 2s are sold and 2 NEX Playgrounds are sold, which completely changes the general perception of the gaming community when it comes to video game consoles that are meant for families and friends. Because the numbers that this NEX Playground are bringing in, whether people want to admit it or not, are effectively Nintendo sales. To casuals, the Blue Ocean people, this is a Nintendo console. This is the Nintendo Christmas gift that you normally would have bought. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them thought that the N in NEX Playground stood for Nintendo. And sure enough, if you put the Switch 2 sales numbers with the NEX Playground sales numbers, they are just shy of the PS5 sales numbers, which is a lot more in line with what we've seen in previous years, specifically during Black Friday. Because while Sony always does win Black Friday, it doesn't usually win it by a landslide. Not in the PS5 era anyway. Anyway, the point is that I think this has been one of the most interesting Black Fridays that we've had in recent years, and for many of the wrong reasons, to be honest. You have an Xbox console, which is more expensive now than it's ever been and not doing any sales effectively. A PlayStation console, which their discount is basically back to the regular price that it was at. A Nintendo console that's more expensive than anything else Nintendo has ever put out in the past by quite a wide margin. And it performed so disappointingly that Walmart decided to discount it, something that just does not happen for Nintendo consoles. And amongst all of this, you got this NEX Playground, which is like a little cube camera you put in front of your TV and makes your kids wave their arms in the air. And the crazy thing, this is just like all of the discussion of Black Friday in the first week of December. And seeing as how all of the numbers and sales and prices are going to be consistent from now through the end of the year, I have very little reason to believe that we'll see that many changes in December. I actually think the biggest surprise here is going to be the NEX Playground. The Switch 2 and the PS5 might have better numbers than November. The Switch 2 might catch up to the PS5, might even surpass it, but I don't think both of those consoles will have a huge surprise and like this mind-blowing December more than anybody would have expected. But I think the NEX Playground might actually have crazy numbers at the end of this month. And a big part of it is because of that success it had on Amazon in Black Friday, which led to Matt Piscatella's tweet, which led to YouTube videos like mine coming out. So all of this is definitely something to keep an eye on. It's making December very exciting if you're somebody that's geeky about this stuff. But it makes me very happy because it gives Nintendo a lot of competition. And I'm pinpointing Nintendo specifically as a Nintendo fan. From a price point angle, it's forcing people to go to the store and decide if they want a Switch 2 or a Sony console, whereas in the past Nintendo had nobody to compete against. And that competition is the reason we got that 10% discount, that $50 off. So I'm hoping that as this generation continues, because Nintendo decided to play ball with the big boys, Sony's deals that they have always had forced Nintendo to also decide to adopt this instead of making Walmart do it behind their back. Hopefully Nintendo starts to actually drop the price of their games and consoles now because they decided they want want to overprice everything. And then from the family-friendly, blue ocean, innovative side of things, this little toy is giving Nintendo a run for its money. Because that grandma that would have gone to the store and been like, what's the cheapest console you got? They give her a Switch Lite, and then she goes home. Now when they go to Walmart, they have these things set up now. The NEX Playground, it's there. It's taking up shelf space from the Xbox, ironically enough. So they're gonna go to the video game section, and then the salesperson's gonna be like, yeah, if you want a cheap budget console that's great for kids, they're not gonna recommend the Nintendo console. They're recommending the NEX Playground, which means Nintendo is going to have to find a way to make their console more appealing. Whether it's through releasing games at a faster rate, offering discounts, there's competition now, and competition is very good. Nintendo has pretty much been uncontested for 7 years. So I genuinely believe the best thing that could happen for Nintendo fans is Sony remains aggressive with their pricing strategy to push Nintendo on the back, and then hopefully this NEX Playground takes off. If for nothing else, just to make more competition in the industry to keep some of these corporations in check, even if it's just a cultural phenomenon for a year or two. But we've seen how these things take off once kids and moms start getting their hands on it. We saw how the Wii just exploded. We saw how Minecraft and Fortnite and all these different games that age group started picking up, how much success they quickly saw. So this thing could genuinely explode. Or, you know, this month might just be its 7 seconds of fame. Either way, that's really all I got for right now. It's been a very fun few weeks, and I'm excited for the upcoming weeks as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.